We're going to get started here. First of all, thank you everyone for joining us today. I'm Erik Paulsen, the chair for the Institute for Gene Therapies, or IGT as we're referred to. Hopefully by now, most of you, at least a good number of you, are familiar with the work that we do and the exciting promise of gene therapies. We'll get to hear from some of our patients and patient advocate groups today. We are hosting this important discussion today alongside with the Alliance for Regenerative Medicines, or ARM as they are known as, because we are sharing concerns all together about the Medicaid Drug Rebate Program, or MDRP, proposed rule. So CMS has proposed changes to MDRP that would have a very negative impact on vulnerable patient populations and their families that are living with unmet medical needs. It specifically takes aim at gene and cell therapies and puts innovation here in the United States at risk. So before we dive into the topic, I do want to introduce our panel that we have with us today. We are incredibly fortunate enough to have with us today Madeline Schloss, who is with the Gaucher Community Alliance. We have Amanda Krzepicki, who is with us today with the Autoimmune Association. We have Kim Fallon with the Hemophilia B Coalition. We have Erik Krzepicki, who is here from ARM, and our own IGT's John Fiore, who is with us today. So maybe we can just kick it off or start here with a perspective maybe from Madeline and Kim first, just to kind of set the table. Maybe you can share at a very high level with everyone here today what gene therapy means to you or some of the folks you come in contact with your patient communities that you represent. So if you want to start, and you and then Kim.
I'm Madeline. I'm 22 years old, and I was diagnosed with type 1 Gaucher disease when I was 5 years old. And since I was 6, I've been on enzyme replacement therapy. So every 2 weeks, I get an infusion that lasts about 2 to 3 hours. And with that, I'm able to lead a healthy and normal life. But every 2 weeks for a few hours is definitely a lot. So for my community, gene therapy is pretty crazy. It's mind-boggling to me that there is now a medicine that I wouldn't have to get infusions anymore and would have the same effect. So to think that my kids, my community would be able to get just one and would change their lives is pretty amazing. Type 1 Gaucher disease is what I have. There's 2 other types of Gaucher disease, and those affect the brain, and there is no cure for those. So gene therapy could be this. So to our community, gene therapy is amazing and could just do a lot for our community.
Please, Kim. Yep.
Hi. Hi, Kim Fallon. I'm with the Coalition for Hemophilia B. I've served as the president and COO for over 3 decades. 20 years ago, gene therapy was a promise, but it didn't work. Now, we have 2 gene therapy products, and it still doesn't work because we can't get access. There's constant blocks with the insurance companies, with Medicaid, trying to give patients the quality of life that we hoped they would have had 20 years ago. People with hemophilia B, we have 13 clotting factors, right? And now we all bleed into our joints. But if you have hemophilia B, you're missing the factor 9. So what happens is that they will continue to bleed, and they can bleed to death unless they have life-saving products. So they have to spend between $500,000 to $800,000 a year. They bleed into the joint so bad that they have depression, they have anxiety, they miss wonderful events that most people don't have to miss, and it's so expensive. And now gene therapy is here, and we have to change the way we look at everything. We have to allow the patients to have this, because if they stay on Medicaid, what happens is they can only make a certain amount of money, right? And then they can't dream of being who they want to be and having the quality of life that they want. So if Medicaid will do the math, you would see, if you're looking at $800,000 a year and gene therapies are just like 3.5, over a 3-year period, you're already meeting your goal. So we have to change the model, and we have to remove the barriers so people can have a good quality of life and they can dream for the future.
Thank you. And maybe Amanda, maybe you can share some background on the Autoimmune Association and also maybe give a perspective of how gene therapies impact your patient communities.
Absolutely. So the Autoimmune Association is the world's leading nonprofit dedicated to autoimmune awareness, advocacy, education, and research. We represent about 50 million Americans with over 100 different autoimmune diseases. Some of the common ones being like MS, rheumatoid arthritis, Crohn's, lupus, type 1 diabetes, and then 50% of those are also rare, so like Graves' disease, vitiligo, thyroid eye disease. We're really excited about gene therapy because there's a lot in the pipeline for autoimmune diseases. I know a lot of what you typically hear in the gene therapy space is dedicated to rare diseases, but at the NIH, and the NIH just had an Office of Autoimmune Disease Research established a few years ago, they're in the pipeline looking at diabetes type 1, arthritis, and lupus, and they'll be using CRISPR technology for any biochem nerds in the audience for lupus and arthritis and MS. And MS and rheumatoid arthritis are currently in their phase 1 and phase 2 clinical trials. So these patients normally rely on biologics, and they have to get infusions much like Madeline to maintain normal levels of life, normal pain, and be in remission, especially those with MS. And when they have access barriers to these biologics with different schemes by insurance companies and PBMs, they can worsen their symptoms, worsen their diseases over their lifetime. So having a gene therapy would be revolutionary to most people who have these diseases and suffer through these conditions.
So each of you have noted how incredibly promising and hopeful and unique gene therapies are, and how we need to be thinking differently in terms of making sure they're going to be paid for and available for patients, right? So at IGT and ARM, of course, our mission is working to make sure that the reimbursement system is modernized, and so we have a system for patient access. But unfortunately, right now with some of the proposed changes with the MDRP, for instance, this directly contradicts some of the innovative payment arrangements that have been supported by HHS and CMS. So Erica, maybe you can dive in a little bit and talk to us about how some of these changes that are proposed actually move us backwards.
Yeah, sure. So as you teed up, we obviously need to innovate and modernize our payment system. The reality is our healthcare system wasn't designed to pay for these one-time administered, durable, and potentially curative therapies. They were really set up with chronic medications in mind. And, we saw some promising things coming out of this administration early last year. We saw them announce a new model, a new demonstration program out of the CMS Innovation Center that was designed to pilot CMS negotiating value-based payment arrangements for gene therapies. And that's something that ARM and IGT have been closely tracking. And so that follows along with this bipartisan interest in moving towards value-based payment and an idea that we should really be paying for outcomes, something that's gained a lot of bipartisan support over time. And then a few months after that, we saw the Biden administration put out a proposed rule to make some pretty sweeping changes to the Medicaid Drug Rebate Program. One of the changes is they're proposing to reinterpret the definition of what a covered outpatient drug is. And that matters because by statute, the Medicaid Drug Rebate Program and the statutory rebates that manufacturers pay to the states and the federal government are on covered outpatient drugs, which, as the name implies, are typically outpatient drugs. But the Biden administration is suggesting that drugs that are administered in a hospital inpatient setting could also be considered covered outpatient drugs, simply if the hospital lists them on the claim form. And that's problematic because already hospitals struggle financially to offer these new therapies because the bundled payment or the way they're reimbursed for care doesn't cover the full cost of the therapy. And so we've seen a lot of states, I shouldn't say a lot, about a dozen or so states start to recognize that the current Medicaid payment system for inpatient drugs like gene therapies was inadequate. And this rule is coming along, and it's essentially taking away the incentive for states to enter into those types of arrangements. And that's going to have a negative impact on hospitals. It's going to have a negative impact on patient access. And importantly, this payment mechanism that I just described, where states pay separately for the drug, is also the precursor for them to be able to enter into value-based payment arrangements. And we think those are one of the keys to really unlocking patient access to these therapies, because value-based payment arrangements help mitigate some of the uncertainty about the long-term impact and benefit of these therapies by allowing states to potentially pay over time or receive a rebate if the drug doesn't meet clinical milestones. And so we feel like these voluntary payment arrangements are a win-win for the payer, for the manufacturer, and ultimately for the patient, because they have timely access to care. And so it's really disappointing to see, on the one hand, the administration, putting forward a demonstration program to try to increase the use of these value-based payment arrangements for certain therapies, for the sickle cell gene therapies, but then broadly making this sweeping change that really is just a sort of punitive measure to try to slash prices. And that's not a new innovative tactic. That's a tactic that we've seen before, and we've seen how it harms patient access.
And John, I know some of the proposed changes also would impose reporting burdens on manufacturers, and I understand that those are not only arduous, but they may fall outside of maybe CMS's authority. Can you maybe elaborate a little bit on that and how that would impact innovation?
Yeah, thank you. So one of the other concerning proposals in this rule is to require certain manufacturers, as yet to be defined, to verify the drug prices that they report to the Medicaid program for AMP, average manufacturer price, and best price, and others. The way that CMS proposes to do this is to take essentially a listing of high-cost drugs, those that have a high launch price, and really create a large list to then whittle it down to what they consider the drugs that whose prices should be verified. They single out gene therapies in this analysis, which doesn't really recognize the true value that gene therapies offer. They may have one high cost, but as we've seen in experience right now and in the promise and hope of them, that they're going to have benefits that extend far beyond just the one-time price that they cost. The survey mechanism itself seems to be a precursor to the Inflation Reduction Act's drug price negotiation program. There's not the authority in the Medicaid Drug Rebate statute to survey manufacturers to justify the prices that they have offered. The statute is pretty clear. Manufacturers submit quarterly reports that list the best price, the average manufacturer price, the wholesale acquisition cost, and the average sales price. There's nothing in the statute or even the regulations that permit CMS to seek a justification of the prices charged by manufacturers. In fact, in 2019, CMS admitted to the OIG that they do not have the authority to question or survey the assumptions that manufacturers use when they create the prices and submit the reports to CMS. So CMS just a couple years ago even said they don't have authority to examine the assumptions. They said that if manufacturers submit your assumptions to them, they'll just take them and they're not going to do anything with them because of their limited authority. But here, in this proposed rule, CMS is saying, not only do we want to see the assumptions, we want to see how you get to those prices. We want to see what it takes in terms of your research and marketing. We want to see the sales tactics. And then we're going to post that online. In the Medicaid Drug Rebate statute, there's actually a provision that states CMS does not have the authority to disclose this information publicly unless it's related to just the price of the AMP. So there's multiple provisions in the statute that prohibit CMS from interfering with the marketplace, with interfering with manufacturers' ability to set their prices that then determine the best price and the AMP and the ASP and the WAC. And so there's one other interesting component. They say in this drug price survey, a manufacturer will be excluded if they are a covered outpatient drug. Well, now they've expanded that to include inpatient drugs. That participates in a value-based payment program. So what we've heard from manufacturers is that they are willing and able and want to enter into value-based payment arrangements with states, but we've seen other organizations report that states are not willing and have not been true partners yet into these value-based payments. Some states don't even meet with manufacturers, so you can't even have these discussions. And so what we're saying is we love the idea of the CMS Innovation Center moving forward. We love the idea of the Medicaid Multiple Best Prices rule, which survived the last two administrations, which is not the easiest thing to do. And that is encouraging manufacturers and states to work together to implement value-based payment arrangements, however defined. But what we don't want to do is suddenly say, we also want all of the information that's proprietary and how you set these prices. And so what we have asked CMS and the Office of Management and Budget is to not move forward with this proposal, is to withdraw it.
So, John and Erica, you both referenced the changes in particular regarding reporting, I guess, some of the reporting the covered outpatient drugs, sorry, which would make it more difficult for providers in particular to be adequately reimbursed, right? Hospitals could be underwater, et cetera, from administering gene therapies. So maybe we can hear a little bit from Kim and Amanda in particular about how this threatens provider participation and thus is negatively going to be impacting our patient areas and our outcomes, right, that patients are going to be a part of. So can you maybe explain some of the barriers to access that you're already witnessing right now as patients, but also how some of these additional threats could prevent access or put patients, particularly those who rely on Medicaid, at risk?
So we used to handle patient problems with insurance several times a month. Now it's several times a week. Their access is being taken away. Their right of choice of products are being taken away. And when you prepare for gene therapy, you have to get into a psychological headset. You have to make a 6-month firm commitment for blood draws. You have to talk to your family. You have to think about your work life. It's a really, really, really big decision. So we see the patients go through the process, and they're finally ready, and then as soon as they get there, the door's closed to them. As I keep saying, the door's closed because we're looking at old model systems that don't work anymore. Gene therapy's here. It's in the future. It's going to be through all disease states, and we have to change it now to give the patients the access. Take the burden off Medicaid, and give the patient back their quality of life so they can go have a job that they love, right? I should not have to be answering, phone calls all the time, several times a week, because people are crying because they can't get what they need. It's not right. It's not.
And I'll follow up on what Kim said. So we have a dedicated staff person at the Autoimmune Association who's taking calls every single day from patients across the country who can't access their biologics anymore because their insurance companies have gotten in and meddled with their policies and sent them to an alternative funding vendor. And there's just so much that's currently going on: step therapy, prior authorization, copay accumulators and maximizers. Like, the list goes on and on and on. They find new ways to add burden to patients' access to care and increase difficulties for them and their families, especially those with children with autoimmune diseases. So we hope to see that, CMS kind of rethinks what they're doing here with the rule, because this is just kind of like a half-baked shower thought of a policy. Like, it seemed good when they were putting it initially down on paper, but when you're thinking about the long-term repercussions, it's, especially with our patient population not having access to the therapies yet, they might end up, manufacturers might end up pulling out of this space if introduction to market becomes unfavorable for them, as we know.
Yeah, going off of that, having a rare disease in general, there's just limited access. Since I got diagnosed, I was told I had very many other conditions before we landed on Gaucher disease. So even just getting the right care, the right doctors, the right medication, it's very limited in general. So growing up, I'm 22, so for most of my life, I personally haven't had to deal with this, but being denied by many insurance companies, being told that I should be on different drugs because it should be cheaper. This is the one that works for me. This is the one that I should be on. So access in general has just been a challenge throughout my whole life, throughout my whole diagnosis. So thinking that gene therapy could be a possibility for me and my community, and that so many people won't be able to access it, is pretty saddening.
And Kim, you had mentioned that this is a big decision for a patient to make. It take several months to even make this decision. Maybe explain a little bit how this is just not something where you just go into the doctor and say, oh, I want to get this gene therapy today. It doesn't work that way.
No, right now gene therapy is a one-time infusion. So it requires multiple blood draws over a 6-month period. You have to have you have to have safe sex. So you have to have protected sex for 6 months. No alcohol. You have to be constantly monitored. And then even after you have the infusion, you still have to be monitored for a year or more, according to what your doctor wants to do. So, I mean, this is really a big, big deal, right? And it's life-changing, and for them to get to that point, and then again, I'm gonna say, and be denied, is horrific. And we have these two products right now, and this is completely unfair. So I guess Medicaid wants to be wants everyone to be a burden. I mean, you can't only make a certain amount of money, right? You can only make a certain amount of money if you're on Medicaid. And that's weighing heavy on the system, but now you can have gene therapy and you can dream and you can do whatever you want. So what's the problem? It's a win-win.
So the MDRP proposed rule is clearly very concerning for patients, for providers, the health ecosystem, but there are ways that we can help. And so, John and Erica, maybe you can explain a little bit about some of the efforts in Congress or what Congress can do as legislators to support gene therapies, to support patients that are standing to benefit from these new innovations.
Well, there's a number of things, as I mentioned, we think that value-based payment arrangements are a helpful tool in addressing some of these access barriers, because we think if they have these tools to better manage the uncertainty around these products and better manage the cost as they're budgeting, that there won't be as many access barriers. And so, again, we push for policies that support the proliferation of voluntary outcomes-based payment arrangements, and both ARM and IGT support legislation, the Medicaid Value-Based Payments for Patients Act, or the MVP Act as it's called. And that's been pretty exciting. It's a bipartisan bill, which there aren't as many of those as there used to be. And it was passed out of the Energy and Commerce Committee, and it was recently introduced in the Senate. And so that's one piece of legislation that we think could really help, particularly for Medicaid patients, but could also have an impact for patients who are commercially insured. So I think that's one important piece. Another barrier that Kim alluded to, and we know is a big challenge, is these are specialized products with specialized clinicians taking care of them. And your local hospital may not have a gene therapy treatment center or may not offer CAR T. And so these centers of excellence are scattered throughout the country. They're not, equally distributed, and they're often not where the patients live. And so a lot of patients have to travel, and that's especially burdensome for Medicaid patients who, first of all, are lower income by definition and have fewer means. But second of all, there's a lot of burden on the providers that take care of them when they have to travel, when the patients have to travel to them, and they have to be credentialed in the state that the patient comes from. So that creates, in some ways, a disincentive for providers to take care of out-of-state Medicaid patients. It creates a lot of burden. We've seen stories in the news recently about how it can really delay access to care. In the case of some of these genetic conditions, patients can rapidly deteriorate. They can potentially die before they access the therapies. So there's also legislation to help address this. The Accelerating Kids Access to Care Act is another bipartisan bill aimed at alleviating some of the Medicaid barriers.
Yeah, I think those bills in particular are hugely important. I think one of the most important things you can do is just, and your boss is pay attention to gene therapies. Take the time to learn about rare disease. 95% of rare diseases do not have an FDA-approved treatment. On the gene therapy side, what we're trying to do is get at the root cause of the genetic disease and potentially cure it. And we have 2 of those for hemophilia B already, which is pretty amazing. And half dozen or more other gene therapies have been approved. Hopefully we'll have more this year. When you see the next gene therapy approved, when you see successful trial results, let your bosses know. We want everyone to understand that gene therapies provide an immense value to the healthcare system, to society. They provide hope to patients and their families and their caregivers. And the innovation that we're making today is going to guarantee innovation tomorrow. And at some point, gene therapies won't just be curing an ultra-rare disease or rare disease. They're going to be eradicating health disparities. They're going to be eradicating more common diseases, as long as we, as a society and members of Congress, allow these innovations to continue.
Well, and John, you're kind of alluding to sort of the big picture and that value component of gene therapies and how critical it is to not ignore the value that gene therapies are going to be able to bring to patients, right? I mean, this is the future and new frontier of medicine, so truly life-changing. in many respects and transformative. So any other thoughts as we kind of wind down our panel, and then we'll take questions if anyone has any from the audience, obviously, but any final thoughts that anyone wants to mention?
Yeah, I mean, maybe we'll just run back down. So, you know, on the drug price verification survey that Medicaid had proposed, you know, they're saying we're just trying to justify the prices, but within their own reasoning, they point to a definition from a dictionary of verify that includes the word justify. And so what they're actually trying to do is force manufacturers to justify the prices. We know that because of the value that gene therapies offer, that the prices are more than justified. We don't need an administrative burden. We don't need more surveys that aren't even permitted, we would argue, under the statute. What we need is for the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services to continue to work with states and manufacturers and patient groups to get these gene therapies off the ground, get them into patients once they're approved by the FDA without barriers and without obstacles.
I'll just add one last thing, which we've touched on a little bit, and that is, you know, these gene therapies have tremendous potential to reduce some of the inequities that we see in health outcomes and in overall quality of life. And this focus on Medicaid, you hear us up here talking about Medicaid, about the Medicaid Drug Rebate Program. You know, Medicaid has a huge role in providing health insurance for low-income and disabled individuals, a disproportionate number of whom are people of color. You know, we just saw the approvals of the 2 sickle cell therapies, the gene therapies, and we know that that disproportionately impacts the Black population. And yet this administration, which has said one of their strategic pillars is advancing health equity, is putting forward policies that really put that in jeopardy by potentially restricting access to these therapies that would no doubt help address some of those health outcomes and ultimately close some of those care gaps.
So basically, Medicaid is setting up the patients to fail. The criteria that they're setting forth is not realistic, and the pharmaceutical companies want to work with Medicaid, right? I get Medicare and Medicaid mixed up, sorry. They want to work with Medicaid to do the value-based programming, so it's a win-win again. So I'm saying, let's remove the obstacles, let's get real about what's going on, and let's move on and give people back the quality of life that they deserve, the patients. Thank you.
I would kind of just reiterate the point that, you know, we saw what the IRA did to investments in the rare space already. We don't want to kind of double down on that bad policy with this bad policy. So, you know, it would mean a lot to patients in the rare space to kind of continue to have manufacturers interested in working on their conditions. And we want to see that science at NIH moving forward.
Coming from a patient perspective, especially in the rare disease community, I think there are so many obstacles that patients have to attack from the second they're diagnosed. So the fact that gene therapy can exist and this could be accessible to my whole community, to the whole rare disease community, and then you just get denied or it isn't actually accessible, needs to be changed. So.
And you talked about how mind-boggling it is as a patient
Exactly.
to not have to go through those annual or weekly infusions, right? That you have to do on a regular basis, right?
Yeah.
It's truly a hope. Right?
Yeah,
Which
exactly.
is exciting. Any questions from the audience? We're just going to open it up too. So, John, maybe it's worth referencing that there are some letters that members of Congress are signing in opposition to the proposed or to the rule, right? The MDRP rule that are bipartisan and.
Yeah, and if you're potentially interested in having your boss sign on, we've got Kenny back there who can help. Yep. Kenny, raise your hand. Yeah, there you go. Yeah, well, you know, the rule is potentially in its final stages before it's finalized. By no means does that mean the fight's over. We're hoping that if CMS doesn't withdraw the rule, that they might not move forward with these particular proposals. There are a lot of technical provisions within the rule. The title of the rule itself makes it seem like just a technical fix, a couple things here or there. And I think the entire industry was kind of shell-shocked once we started reading this rule and realized that there are actually changes that go against the rebate authority that CMS has and could potentially harm the movement forward in value-based contracting and future innovation in gene therapy. So we definitely encourage you to let your bosses know that there are serious concerns, not just from manufacturers, but from patients and providers as well.
Please.
Well, I don't want to say they're not true partners. I say, I think it's important to say that we haven't seen as much progress on value-based contracting as we would like to see, just as a health policy ecosystem. There are states that have entered into certain value-based payment arrangements with some manufacturers. We saw, I believe it was an ASGCT report on the challenges that manufacturers are facing in their conversations with states. I think many states and manufacturers have been asking CMS to release some additional guidance, help us get to that point where we can get at a table together and negotiate and see if there's a value-based payment arrangement that works for a particular therapy. Not all therapies, not all disease states will be amenable to certain value-based payment arrangements, but unless we have those conversations, unless they're happening often, we're not going to see more VBAs. Well, yeah, that's a great point. It's administratively complex and costly in many respects. There has to be a way to track the patients and their outcomes or their conditions further than a year, so we can see the true benefits. That's why we were encouraged by CMS's Innovation Center moving forward with the CGT access model, something where CMMI said, we'll work on the administrative complexities so that states and manufacturers can focus on the gene therapy, the patients, and what the terms of a outcomes or value-based payment arrangement could be. So we love that CMS, who controls the Innovation Center, was doing there and the multiple best prices. But then when they, on the other hand, propose a rule that would use a stick to force manufacturers into these arrangements when not enough states might be ready for those, that's where we're seeing a disparity that shouldn't move forward.
I definitely touched on this, but the value is definitely what so many people in my community see so amazing about this. Like I said, I've been getting IV infusions every 2 weeks since I was 6 years old, and the actual infusion's probably about 2 hours, but between the nurse coming to my house, mixing the medicine, during college I would travel home every 2 weeks to get this infusion because I had my nurse and my doctors there. So that whole process, while I did get used to it, unfortunately, to think that this gene therapy could just take all of that away for the rest of my life and my kids' lives and my community's lives is, like I said, pretty mind-boggling. So the value in the gene therapy just for quality of life is pretty amazing.
Every kid wants to have a sleepover, right? But a lot of kids with hemophilia, they're denied that because the other families don't want to have to deal with them if they have a problem, right? There's so much depression, there's so much anxiety, there's so much pain that these patients are going through. Their value is their quality of life, right? And this is really important. Look at the long-term math, though. Just look at the value that way, but you're giving them the quality of life that they have not had. And this is something so simple to do. And if we don't move forward with this, then research will stop. Look at how far we've come, right? And we can't have roadblocks like this to patients' quality of life. Can't.
And I would kind of continue that on if a patient is in a state where they need a gene therapy, that can be curative for them. So if they're taking other biologics or other products on the market, those can tend to not work, and then they can regress in their symptoms and get worse and develop new symptoms. So I think it's really critical for patients to have a better quality of life by just diverting to the gene therapy earlier and not risking, having adverse outcomes.
Any other questions from anyone in the audience? Just make sure, yep, please. If there's no other comments or questions, we'll get ready to close down. And maybe we'll just wrap up by mentioning, as Erik had said, we had exciting news last week with the Senate introducing bipartisan legislation. So it was Senators Mullen, Sinema, Scott, and Hassan who introduced a companion bill to the Medicaid VBPs for Patient Acts, or the MVP Act. This legislation is really important. It's really important in our efforts to help ensure that there are mechanisms to help pay for gene therapies and keeping pace with the innovative science that's out there. I want to encourage all of you or your bosses to take a look at that legislation. It's very important. It's passed out of the House committee already, very bipartisan support. Now we have bipartisan support in the Senate, and we have some educational materials also, I think just outside the door. You can grab those and take those with you, as well as some educational materials on the MDRP rule that you can take with you. We do want to thank everyone for taking the time to join us today. Hope you found the discussion informative, and please feel free to mingle around for a little bit, but we are going to transition to another room for refreshments / happy hour, where we will have some of our experts with us if you want to just have some social conversation. And please know that all of us at the Institute for Gene Therapies and the Alliance for Regenerative Medicine are available as a resource for any educational background or answers to any of these questions, and we wish you a wonderful evening. Thank you.